Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Madeleine Thakur, President and CEO of the Children's Movement of Florida, and thrilled to be your MC for today's program. I'm so excited to welcome you to the fourth annual Reading Pals Conference and Celebration. Most of you already know the Children's Movement of Florida. We are the state's leading voice on early childhood. We champion the policies and investments that help young children thrive in their first 5 years. And that, of course, means ensuring they've got high quality early learning opportunities, access to healthcare, and parent support. That also means Reading Pals, our statewide early literacy and mentorship initiative that provides meaningful opportunities for volunteers to support young readers who need extra help. This program exists because of the vision and generosity of Carol, Barney, and Wesley Barnett. Their family's support has allowed us to offer Reading Pals in 15 Florida regions for the last 13 school years. All of this, of course, in partnership with United Ways, Early Learning Coalitions, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and our other partners across the state who lead Reading Pals in their communities. As we begin this year's conference, I remember that there were 646 of you last year here with us live, and that number is going up as we speak. I see people still entering the room. We've got about 285 this very moment, with more joining as we speak. We've got a diverse audience today: volunteers, teachers, parents, local leaders, partners, supporters, and even some folks who are eager to learn from our keynote who are learning about Reading Pals for the first time. We're thankful for your taking the time to come together to learn and to celebrate another successful year. So let me share a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, we're recording this conference, so all of the material will be available after the fact if you want to share this with others or if you want to listen again. We will make good use of the chat today. So and we hope you will too. So why don't we have everyone introduce themselves? I see a lot of activity already in the chat. Thank you. We want to know who you are, where you're watching from, which Reading Pals program you're associated with. And if you want to join the conversation on social media, that hashtag, real simple, hashtag Reading Pals, and you'll see that also in the chat. Finally, if you're here and you need a certificate for this 1 hour of in-service, you can email us info@childrensmovementflorida.org, and that's a mouthful, so we've also got that in the chat, and we'll remind you at the end. All right, so here is how the next 75 minutes or so will go. First, I'll share some brief Reading Pals highlights from the last school year. Then I'll introduce Dr. Jason Yateman, our keynote speaker on the brain science of reading. We'll have some brief time for Q&A. And so you see there's the chat, and then there's also that Q&A feature at the bottom here in Zoom. Please use that Q&A feature if you want to highlight a question for that Q&A period. And then finally, at the end of our program, we'll celebrate 2 of our regional partners, including a special spotlight video for our fastest growing program. And as I hear this horrific thunder and lightning outside our windows, I hope to stay with you until the end. But I'm sure we're dealing with all kinds of weather all over the state. So let's get right to it. Let me start by sharing a little bit more about Reading Pals. Since the beginning, this program has been about more than just early literacy skills. Sure, we focus on improving students' vocabulary and understanding of the foundational building blocks of early literacy, but we also know that a consistent relationship with a mentor contributes to building confidence, self-awareness, and we know that the joyful experiences with books help develop a love of reading. Our model is simple. Volunteers are recruited, screened, and trained every year. Then students who could use some extra help are selected by their teachers. Mentors and students are paired, mostly 1-to-1, but sometimes 1-to-2, particularly in the younger years. And they meet for an hour a week during the school year. Each program provides a curriculum to work with during these weekly sessions. That's books to read and learning games to play. And all the children in the program receive books for their home libraries, at least 12 books a year. Our model is manageable for volunteers. A quick thank you to the more than 1,000 of you who completed the volunteer survey this year. One volunteer noted that this program is perfect with her demanding job, allowing her to be consistent in mentoring without requiring a ton of time. So many more of you talked about the joy of being involved in the community and making a difference. During the 2024-2025 school year, more than 1,500 volunteers were paired with nearly 3,000 students across 20 Florida counties. 45,708 books were donated to students to build their home libraries. You can also see here that more than 3/4 of our volunteers plan to return next year, and nearly all of you would recommend this to a friend. In fact, more than 40 volunteers across the state have been with the program for more than 10 years, and that consistency is key. Of course, this could be you. If you're not yet a volunteer, check out the link in the chat to see where the closest Reading Pals program is to you and if it's your turn. Our tagline is Mentor to Make a Difference, and our volunteers consistently share what a difference this has made for them. One volunteer says simply that spending this time in the classroom has reinforced how reading matters for very young children. Another talks about how stumbling blocks can become building blocks with the right support. And these building blocks give us the opportunity now to transition to learn from our keynote speaker. We do have a special treat for you today. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Jason Yateman, an associate professor at Stanford University with appointments in the Department of Psychology, the Graduate School of Education, and in pediatrics at the med school. He's also director of Stanford's Brain and Education Lab. I know you're really here to hear from Dr. Yateman, so I'll tell you just 3 things about him. The first is that he spends his days studying the neurobiology of literacy, how the brain learns to read, so that he can design literacy intervention programs that work. The second is that he has small children at home, so admittedly, I am guessing here, he experiments on them too. And number 3 is his favorite book as a child and today is Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go. Dr. Yateman, we're thrilled to welcome you virtually to Florida today, and the floor is yours.
Hey, well, it's a pleasure to be here. I wish I got to visit in person. It's always more fun getting to actually talk with people and hear your stories and take questions, but we'll do Zoom for now. I'm zooming in from California today, and I'm going to be talking about some work going from the lab to the classroom and back with a focus on the brain science of reading. So the approach in my lab is really to try to inspire a virtuous cycle between education and neuroscience. I will use this term a lot throughout my talk. The idea is that I don't think about this work as a one-way street. I like to think about trying to build new collaborations, build interdisciplinary collaborations that bring in the expertise of educators, of neuroscientists, of technology developers to try to create real solutions. So much of this work starts off looking like a educational intervention program that many of you are probably already familiar with. This is actually probably the day-to-day for many folks here. This is an image from a previous intervention study in my lab. And as a neuroscientist, I see these types of educational programs as a powerful tool to understand how a child's experience shapes their brain development. We can change different aspects of the literacy program, then actually measure how that's inspiring the brain to change and rewire itself. So this over here is not just a pretty image. It's actually data from the study I'm going to be presenting. And by the end of this talk, you'll know why these different bundles of wires are colored different colors. Okay, so this will be one of the learning goals actually to understand this figure here. Now, the long-term vision is to think about neuroscience as a tool to predict learning and personalize education. That's not a reality right now. We're not going to have, brain measures in every classroom. I don't know if we ever will, or if it even makes sense to. But a lot of the goals of this work are to understand each individual's unique pattern of brain maturation, so we can think about how we tailor an education program to suit that individual's unique needs. Now, our first step to making this a reality has been launching the Rapid Online Assessment of Reading, or ROAR. This is not a brain imaging measure directly, but it came from all of our brain science research. This is a open access assessment platform that's used in hundreds of schools around the country right now. And you all get to be the first to hear about our exciting new launch of Roar at Home, which is a portal for any parent to create an account for their kid, to have access to Roar assessments and get score reports in real time to give them more information on their kids' reading development. So the learning objectives today are going to be for you all to be able to answer a series of questions. So first of all, how does the brain learn to read? What is different about the dyslexic brain? How do we measure brain development? I will spend a little bit of time talking about the methods we use to understand brain development. Can we change the brain through education? And then finally, I'm going to end with by switching to another slide deck talking about new innovations in screening and assessment and our goal to build bridges between the lab, the community, and the classroom. And we'll end with the launch of Roar at Home. There's a sign up link there and a QR code. This is a way for basically to democratize access to high quality research backed assessments. So any parent in the country can sign their kid up and have access to Roar totally for free. Schools have access to Roar for free as well. So I want to zoom way out and begin by thinking about literacy in the context of evolution. So this is a image from a paper that's actually written for kids. It's a journal called Frontiers in Young Minds. These are two famous scientists who wrote an article about the reading brain targeted for kids. And I still love this figure. It shows that there's evidence that spoken language and grammatical language has been with our species since the beginning. However, reading is this very brief blip. So the oldest written language are these that have been discovered, are these Sumerian cuneiform tablets from about 3100 BC. But the idea of a literate society is maybe a couple hundred years, maybe 100 years old at the most. What this means is that our brains did not evolve for literacy. There's no circuits lying latent in your brain that are just waiting to see books to learn how to read. This is something that must be taught. It's a recent cultural invention of human societies, and the brain must reorganize itself in order to be able to read. So rather than thinking at the scale of evolution, let's instead think about the scale of our own kids. So thinking about literacy in the context of child development. So what I want you both to think about is that the two people in this now outdated image see fundamentally different things. So I look at this book and I can't help but hear the sounds of language that were written down by the author. Whereas my 9-month-old daughter at this point just sees a bunch of pretty pictures and squiggles and continues to for years. So, this is her about 6 months later, where she could speak, she could demand I read her more books, but still the text on the page is totally meaningless. And then a little later, when she has now a younger sister, she was about 4 at this point, actively communicating, able to be engaged, to reason, to talk, to communicate her feelings. So was a proficient communicator in language, despite the fact that she had never been taught language. She just learned it through being in an environment where her parents were speaking language. But text is still meaningless to her, right? Now, a little bit later, this was after she just finished kindergarten, and now she actually had learned to read. She's starting to teach her younger sister. And so the point I want to make is that literacy was invented by modern societies. Our brain is not pre-wired for reading. It's something that must be taught, right? It requires years of instruction. So the idea is that the neural circuitry of literacy is constructed in response to education. So for the educators on the call or the parents that are teaching their kids to read or the advocates, you are building circuits in these young brains to do an incredible new thing, that was never anticipated by our evolutionary context, but is an invention, one of the great inventions of modern human societies. So for those with children with dyslexia or work with kids with dyslexia, it might come as no surprise that many children struggle, right? This is not something that's written into our brains or written into our DNA. The brain must resculpt itself to meet the new demands of literacy. So maybe it's no surprise that many children struggle with this, and this is what we refer to as developmental dyslexia. So let's unpack this point and think about what's going on in my adult brain versus my infant daughter's brain as we're reading this book together. So, from a brain science perspective, some things are actually almost identical in our brains, despite the over 30 years of developmental differences between our brains. So, as we open this book and we look at the first image of a bunny rabbit, information is first processed in the eye and then sent to the back of the brain, the primary visual cortex, all the way back here. So this is like right back here at the back of your brain. This is the part of your brain that's analyzing the simplest features of the image, starting to see the line segments and the colors that make up the picture of the bunny rabbit. Then information goes through a series of regions that are right along here, along the bottom surface of the brain, so right through here. And these regions are involved in visual recognition. So in my, I think, 34-year-old brain at this point, and my daughter's 9-month-old brain, a fascinating thing is that this visual recognition process is largely the same. Within a couple hundred milliseconds, our visual cortex analyzes the image and is able to quickly recognize that we see an image of a bunny rabbit. However, as my eyes move to the text, now is when things are fundamentally different in our brains. So in my literate adult brain, within this big swath of regions involved in visual processing, there's a specific region involved in visual word recognition. Now you might be thinking, how do I have a region that's devoted to visual word recognition when I just made the point that evolution didn't anticipate reading? Well, this region, in fact, develops as a function of learning to read. So this is a example of your brain's capacity for plasticity, its capacity to change with experience. So in my literate adult brain, this part of my visual cortex is plugged into my brain's spoken language circuitry. So in my brain, as soon as I see a word, the information is being rapidly transmitted to circuits that evolved for spoken language. So one way I like to think about literacy is that it's plugging your visual system into your language system in a new way. That many of the components of this circuitry are there, right? Your brain evolved to be able to process visual information, to be able to understand and create spoken language. And the process of learning to read is building new connections between these different brain circuits. Now, of course, I'm reading out loud to my daughter. I'm not just leafing through the pages. Another fascinating thing is as soon as I start reading out loud, these same spoken language circuits are becoming active in her brain. So essentially, her brain is processing the spoken language information in a similar way that my brain is processing the written language information. So you might look at these brain circuits that are spread out by many centimeters of brain tissue. And another key component of the brain for literacy is the wires that connect these circuits. We scientists refer to this as the white matter. We call it white matter because it's this fatty tissue that are little bundles of wires insulated in fat that allow signals to rapidly be sent between different brain regions. Now, this isn't a neuroscience lecture, so you don't need to remember the names, but for the science nerds out there, I'll give you the names of these structures. So these are two different bundles of wires, white matter pathways, that allow information to rapidly flow between the brain's visual processing centers and the brain's language processing centers. Okay, so 4 points to remember throughout this talk is that learning to read drives the development of specialized brain regions for rapid word recognition. In the literate brain, written words are processed like spoken words. So I gave you this analogy of our visual system being plugged into our language system in a new way. The connections are critical, right? So these bundles of wires that send information between these different brain circuits are critical for reading. And finally, brains are different. Learning to read is easy for some brains and difficult for others. So let's focus on this point and get to the next part of the talk and ask what is different about the dyslexic brain. Well, let's review what the brain must learn to achieve literacy. Right? So your brain must rapidly recognize a complex visual pattern. It can then associate this visual pattern with speech, right? So that's this first process of learning to read is this connection between vision and speech. And of course, we teach reading once kids are already proficient in spoken language. So once the visual information, the letters can be associated with the speech, well, the brain can already link sound and meaning together. So learning to read requires coordinating visual, auditory, and language processing in a new way. And as you might have guessed, this means that efficient wiring is critical. So these arrows connecting these different parts of the brain circuits are critical for proficiently learning how to read. And it turns out that this is one thing that's different in the dyslexic brain. So I'm showing a rendering of the human brain's reading circuitry, these bundles of wires that connect together the different brain regions. When you see these colorful renderings of wires in the human brain, I want you to be thinking about an analogy to this NASA supercomputer here. Okay, where these bundles of wires in the NASA supercomputer allow information computed in one region of the supercomputer, one set of nodes, to be sent to another region. Similarly, these bundles of wires, these white matter connections in your brain, allow information that's, for example, coming in your visual system at the back of the brain, be rapidly sent to language processing regions. So we call this tissue white matter. This is what it would look like under a very high-powered electron microscope. And what scientists have found over the past couple decades, based on brain imaging research, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, is that children with dyslexia show subtle differences in the white matter connections. The way these connections are organized together, the efficiency of these connections, is subtly different in the brains of children with dyslexia who are struggling learning to read. So now you might ask, well, can we change the connections of the brain's reading circuitry? I just said that children with dyslexia show subtle differences in the way these connections are structured, but can we intervene and actually change the structure of these connections to make the wiring more efficient? I'll give away the answer. It's yes, but now I'm going to go through the science to show you how we learned that. So we did an intervention study where we brought in 34 children with dyslexia. We recruited them for an intensive summer reading intervention program. This intervention involved 4 hours a day of one-on-one training, 5 days a week for 8 weeks. So I bolded the point intensive. This is quite different than what's typically done in a school setting. This is like a very high dosage intervention, which is actually quite important for children with dyslexia. The intervention involved training on the building blocks of literacy, so working on segmenting and blending speech sounds, building and deconstructing words with different letter combinations, constantly working on decoding more complex words and building up fluency in reading. We then had control participants who participated just in business as usual school. And then the kids would come into the lab every 2 weeks, and we would administer a series of standardized assessments to look at their reading accuracy, rate, and fluency. And then we would also make measures of their white matter, of these brain connections, with a technology called diffusion MRI. So let's first look at the behavioral data. And what I'll show you is how reading skills improve over the course of this intervention. So this is showing data for one participant. So this is showing their progression through the intervention. So starting at 0 hours of intervention when the summer starts. And this is after 50, 100, and 160. So over the course of the intervention. And this is showing growth in a measure called basic reading skills. This is a measure of the complexity of words that a child can read. This would be the population average, so like the mean student, the average student in the US. And this is kind of considered the normal range here. So this data point for one individual is showing a fourth grade student that came in and was only able to decode 3 and 4 letter words, really profoundly struggling. For those that know the demands of fourth grade, you can imagine what a struggle school would be every day for this child. But they showed substantial growth over the course of the intervention, almost actually getting all the way up into the normal range of reading abilities. Here's data for different individuals. They come in at different places. They're all struggling readers. They all show growth over time. Here's the average amount of growth. What we see is that on average over the course of the intervention, children are going from about the 10th to the 30th percentile on different measures of reading skills. Put it in a different way, this is about 1 grade level of growth in reading skills over the course of summer. So a pretty good effect in terms of like how much kids are gaining over the course of a summer program. And some children even increasing as much as 2 to 3 grade levels. So some children going through an intervention like this is really a profound experience that changes their educational trajectory. Okay, so this is the behavioral data. We see that we can intervene, we can improve reading skills, even in the most struggling readers. Now let's take a brief aside to learn about how we actually measure brain connections, and then we'll look at the data relating improvements in reading skills to changes in the brain. So the technology we use is MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging. If I was there in person, I'd ask for a raise of hands of who's had an MRI, and it's probably just about everyone here. My first MRI was for a high school sports injury, tore a disc in my back playing lacrosse. It's the exact same machine, the exact same technology that's used to create images of your back, of your knee, or of your brain. So MRI is used for measuring any type of soft tissue, and many people in the room here probably had MRIs for sports injuries or for brain injuries. So structural MRI measures the anatomical structure of the brain or the back or the knee or the heart, any piece of soft tissue in your body. Functional MRI measures changes in blood flow that result from neural activity. So when you're looking at images like this showing different parts of the brain on fire or lighting up, this is the same technology that's used to measure the structure of your knee or back, but tuned in a different way to actually be sensitive to changes in blood flow that result from neural activity. So when you see an image like this, it's coming from the exact same machine. Now, the type of MRI that I'm going to be talking about is diffusion MRI. This is a measure of the connections between different brain regions. So what we do is we measure how water is moving around your brain, and that lets us track these wires that connect together different brain regions. So how exactly does that work? This is the technology we use in a lot of our research. Well, so diffusion MRI, it's totally non-invasive. I've been in the scanner hundreds of times, and it's a measure of how water is flowing through brain tissue. So an analogy I'll give you is thinking about pipes. You can think about these white matter connections, these bundles of wires, like pipes connecting different parts of your brain. And as we have less water diffusion, it indicates better insulation in the pipe. So to the extent to which water is diffusing around everywhere, well, that's kind of like a leaky pipe. And as we get better insulation, it's going to decrease water diffusion. Another analogy that might be helpful for those that like an internet analogy rather than a plumbing analogy is as we see a decrease in water diffusion, it's also indicative of these pipes, these wires in the brain becoming more highly organized and being able to send more information between different brain regions. So this is what it looks like. This is a kid lying in the scanner. Diffusion MRI is a measure of the structure of your brain, the physical structure, the wires that connect together different brain regions. And this means that kids can just lie in the scanner, watch their favorite movie. When we started this study, SpongeBob was the favorite movie. Switched to Frozen. If we were running a new study, I'm sure it'd be one of the new kids movies that my kids are watching nowadays. And so we're measuring the wires that connect together different brain regions. Kids just lie in the scanner and watch a movie and relax. I have Madagascar is the next one that was quite popular. This is what the data looks like coming off the scanner. And then we write processing pipelines, algorithms that are able to identify these different brain connections, these different bundles of wires within an individual's brain. And then from that, we can extract a measure that gives us an indication of how well organized the wires are in each individual's brain. Okay, so let's apply this technology and to look at how the brain is changing over the course of this intervention. So we're going to look at this one pathway. The name of it isn't important, but for the science nerds here, it's called the arcuate fasciculus. This big arcing pathway that connects together different parts of your brain's language circuitry. And we're going to look at the diffusion in this part of the brain at the beginning of the intervention, so before kids come in. So not an interesting measure on its own, it's just how much water is diffusing. But what we see is that after 50 hours of intervention, so basically right within the first couple weeks in the intervention, we're already seeing a significant decrease in water diffusion. Remember that water diffusion going down is indicative of these wires being more densely packed together or the plumbing being better insulated. So within just a couple weeks of learning, we're seeing the brain begin to restructure itself, begin to create new tissue, more efficient connections between brain regions. Over the course of the intervention, we see this change persisting, and we don't see this in the control group. So what this means, going back to our analogy, is that in this group of participants that are going through this intensive literacy intervention, that the brain's wiring is becoming better insulated, allowing for more information to be sent along these wires. This is a change in the actual structure of the brain circuit. So for those of you that are interventionists or working at teaching young kids to read, what I want you to keep in mind is that you're not just teaching a new strategy, or you're not just teaching a kid to work around their challenges. You're actually fundamentally changing the way the circuit is structured. You're changing the way that the brain is wired together by teaching kids new skills. So you might ask, is this just one piece of brain tissue that's going through change? And the answer is no. So remember this first image I showed of a color map. Remember, these are all different brain connections. And the color map is showing how much growth there was in different brain connections. So the connections that are green are ones that were stable, showing no change. The ones that are warm colors are all parts of the brain that are showing growth during this intervention program. So what I want you to take away is that brain changes are widespread. They're not just localized to a single brain region. And these changes track learning in each individual. This means that as you're working with a kid, as you're helping them go through the challenges of overcoming their difficulties in reading, that their brains in real time are reorganizing themselves, creating more insulated, faster processing connections to allow them to achieve this new skill. Okay, so takeaways from the first half of this talk. So reading difficulties are associated with differences in brain connectivity. I showed you that, thinking about the analogy of the brain like a supercomputer, and you have these connections that allow information to go from the visual processing parts of the brain to the language processing parts of the brain. And in children with dyslexia or other struggling readers, we see subtle differences in the way the brain is wired together. However, even in children with severe dyslexia, the most struggling readers, interventions are highly successful. So one takeaway for all the parents and all the educators here is don't give up on these kids. Even the kids with the most profound struggles can learn to read with a high quality structured intervention program. The other thing we see, the brain science shows us that intervention changes the connections of the brain's reading circuitry. So for these kids that are struggling, when you get them into a high quality, evidence-based program, you're actually changing the physical structure, rewiring their brains. So for the teachers here, I really want you to all appreciate that you should be considered brain engineers. You are changing the physical structure of these young minds. And to the educators and activists here, education, a high quality education system is sculpting children's brain development. It's sculpting the brains that they'll have for the rest of their lives. So one point that emerges from this is we need better methods, systems level methods for early identification and intervention, ways to quickly identify kids that are struggling with reading and have specific gaps in the learning process, and be able to quickly intervene to overcome these challenges, to rewire their brains before it becomes a persistent issue. So far I've been talking about this half of the circle, thinking about how education, how experience in the classroom sculpts brain development. Hopefully you can now all explain this image to your friends. This is showing the parts of the brain that are changing, the wires, the connections that are changing as kids go through this intervention. Second half of this talk is going to be closing this loop, thinking about new tools that have emerged from this research, the Rapid Online Assessment of Reading, which is an open access platform for assessment, screening, and diagnosis. All right, so I'm going to switch to another slide deck. Give me 1 second. And I'll ask the organizers actually if there is this would be a good point to stop for questions. I'm happy to take a question. I'll let the organizers interrupt me if they think it's a good question moment. Otherwise, I'll keep going on to the second half of the talk.
Oh,
Madeline, what do you think?
absolutely. We've got some questions here in the chat, but I have one pressing question for you. You know, we're sitting in Florida, you're in California. These are places where we have a lot of bilingual learners. And I'm curious if you can comment on how those brains might be a little bit different, and if so, how?
You know, in many ways, the neuroscience of learning to read as a bilingual has a lot of similarities. So this part of the brain that I was talking about, the visual word form area that develops as we become literate, that same patch of tissue that is actually recognizing words in English or Spanish or Mandarin or whatever language you're learning to read. And it develops over the course of this process learning to read. And the reading process kind of tunes up that brain circuit to be able to rapidly recognize words in whichever written language you're being taught, right? So there's nothing special about the characters we've chosen to represent spoken English. You could have chosen another character set, and that same piece of brain tissue would be the region that's learning that, right? When it comes to screening and assessment, this is where one of the challenges comes in because the learning trajectory is going to be quite different. If you enter school and English is your second language, or you don't yet speak English, and your school's teaching you to read in English, well, now you have two challenges at the same time. You have to learn the spoken language, right? And you have to learn the written language. So that's an extra challenge there. And that's where thinking about high quality assessments, regular assessments, really important for schools at a systems level to track students' progress In California, we have various like dual immersion programs where instruction can be across different languages. I don't actually know how that the policy around that in Florida, but this is a place where like assessments become really critical to make sure that skills are generalizing from one language to the other, and kids are on the right developmental trajectory. So that's actually a great transition also into the second part of this talk. So everything we do in ROAR is we have everything normed in both English and Spanish. So for any parents of multilingual learners here, you can sign up for ROAR at home and have access to assessments in both languages. Madeline, do you want to ask another question before I dive in?
Well, I do have a few more questions. Let me ask a couple that we've gotten through the chat as well. I think what you just commented on, someone says, how is the development of brain circuits for the reading the same or different in learning to read music? And I wonder if that's a similar answer to what you just shared. And then somebody asked, how early can you see the dyslexic brain? Is this something you can scan at birth, or is it once you get more of those circuits? And I'll just throw out one more. You can take these as you wish, but there's a question about children with autism on the autism spectrum, and do those brains also look differently initially, and how does that impact when we talk about learning to read?
Yeah, great
Um,
questions. Great questions. Perfect transition too. So the reading music point, I actually don't know. There's not a lot of research done on. There is some, and I think there's similarities and differences. Now on the early identification point, so dyslexia or autism, but I'll talk about dyslexia since that's my area of expertise. But I think a lot of this kind of generalizes across different developmental differences. It's always an interaction between the biology you're born with and the experiences you have. So there's not any indication, so statistically we can look at young brains and we can make predictions about who's going to struggle. And we can also start assessing skills early. So we can assess language skills in 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. We can start assessing phonemic awareness in 4 and 5-year-olds. And the development is continuous, right? And so this means the things we measure early on are quite predictive of things that happen later on, but it's not deterministic, right? So there's no measure that we can make in a newborn and say, this is going to be a dyslexic kid when they're 7 years old, right? But there are indications we can look at. And the biggest indication, so the one biggest thing, if you're looking for risk factors for dyslexia, the biggest one is, do you have dyslexia? If you're a parent with dyslexia, your kid is about 25% more likely to have dyslexia. And if
mm.
you and your partner both have dyslexia, your kid is at substantially higher risk. So what does this mean? This means keep your eyes out for the signs. Start working on these precursors to reading early on. Start playing phoneme games to start looking at phoneme awareness, before school age. Start, working on letters and keeping your eyes out for challenges in learning letters and letter sound, right? I want to emphasize one of the big points from the first part of the talk, if you take away one thing, is that the brain is malleable. So even if you have dyslexia and your partner has dyslexia and both your parents have dyslexia and there's a long family history of dyslexia, this doesn't mean that, hope is lost for your child learning to read, right? Get them in a good intervention program and the brain can be re-sculpted by these experiences. At a systems level, this is the impetus for the development of ROAR. Our goal is to build bridges between the lab, the community, and the classroom. Okay. Our goal is to create systems level change where schools have the tools they need to efficiently screen and hopefully then efficiently give kids the support they need. So I'm going to dive into this. Madeline, how much longer do you want me to go for?
Well, go through this, and then I'll come back with more questions when you're done.
Okay. So when we started developing ROAR, the problem we set out to solve is that assessments are time consuming and resource intensive, meaning that they are generally administered one-on-one. They require a trained test administrator. This makes them costly. They also often cost a lot to purchase from publishers. And as a scientist, I'm always bothered that a lot of assessments are grounded in opaque proprietary products that often don't have a solid grounding in science. So our solution was building Roar, an open science platform of completely automated assessments, meaning that these are all online tools. Kids take them on their own. They're guided through them by fun characters. They don't need a test administrator. So they can be done in a group setting. They can be done across the whole state. The state of Florida could decide they want every kid in Florida to be assessed with ROAR at the first day of school. And this would, require almost no resources because it's just, an automated web application that students sign into. And importantly, it's developed as a part through a research practice partnership model. This means that we bring in the voices of the school district leaders and the community-based organizations we work with, and that's part of crafting the science that goes into developing these assessment tools. Um, just this week, we launched Roar at Home. It's still in beta mode, so those of you that create accounts, you might hit little snags. We're trying to make this as a free open access portal for parents to sign up for research studies if they want to have their kids take different Roar assessments, and parents get the score reports in real time. So if you're worried about your child having reading challenges, or you're just interested in tracking their reading development, you can create an account here and take Roar assessments and get the scores. Okay. So this is a image of Roar in a school setting. All the kids are taking the same assessment at the same time. It takes this one that they're taking takes about 5 minutes, so it's just a couple minutes of class time. The idea is that it's kid-friendly, efficient, and totally automated, so that a school can assess an entire district. So not just early screening in kindergarten, but an entire district K to 12 in just a few minutes. The assessments are computer adaptive, meaning that the same assessment platform works for kindergartners and high schoolers. It's developed entirely through research practice partnership models in collaboration with educators and families. One of our big high-level missions here is to build bridges between academic research and the school system and families, community-based organizations to really make sure the research we're doing reflects the voices of the community. And the goal here, too, is to allow teachers to spend more time teaching and less time administering and scoring assessments. Teachers get into this game because they want to work with kids. They want to help them reading. With reading, most teachers don't want to learn the details of how you administer and score and database and assessment. So we're trying to lift that burden for teachers. So as I mentioned, this is developed through a research practice partnership model. As I promised, this idea of a virtuous cycle would come back. So, as scientists, we have a mission around scientific transparency. Every measure we develop, every research study we do, we publish an open access journal. So you can go online and read every paper we've written. Actually, here's a QR code that we try to keep this up to date and publish open access versions of the technical manual. So once again, for the science nerds here, you can go in and read the hundreds of pages of technical details on Roar. Or you can just go in and browse the publications or public talks. On the school district side, so we now have collaborations. Actually, here's an updated map with hundreds of schools around the country. Roar is currently implemented in 31 states and 5 countries. And what we're working towards is building enduring links between research and practice, with the goal of serving 1 million learners totally for free, and also at the same time unlocking new research opportunities, making sure that the research we're doing at universities like Stanford and universities around the country reflect the true diversity of educational experiences around the United States. We want to make sure our research is not just about the kids in Palo Alto who happen to live next to Stanford, but it reflects the incredible diversity of experiences kids have in different schools around the country. Okay, so I'm going to go through a little bit of science on the development of our first reading assessment. And the point I want to make is that the development of this task began with a hypothesis. Began with a hypothesis about an efficient and scalable way to measure single word reading. We developed a task called a lexical decision task. This is a task that has a long history in cognitive science research. We had a hypothesis that this simple task would tap into the same skills that are typically assessed by assessments like the Woodcock-Johnson basic reading skills measure, where kids read words out loud. So this test you're seeing a kid playing it right here. Words flash on the screen, either real words or made up words. And the task is just to indicate whether it's a real word or not. You get guided through by characters, you win prizes along the way. So all of you are probably thinking, well, this feels quite different than reading out loud. And that's why I bolded the point that there's a hypothesis. We had a hypothesis this task would tap into the same skills as reading out loud. So we developed the first version of Roar. This was actually right at the beginning of the pandemic. The lab had just shut down, and we had a group of kids who had come in to be screened through a 2 hour in-person assessment session. Actually, that was the initial screening for the study that I just presented for you. And then we had them take this new ROAR measure at home. So what you're seeing here is their in-person assessment score based on this gold standard of how proficiently they can read words out loud versus their accuracy on this first version of ROAR. What you can see is a really strong correlation, where all the points lie right along the line, correlation of above zero point 0.9, showing that this task tapped into almost the same skill set as this conventional gold standard reading out loud measure. So this was the first proof of concept. We then went on to ask whether we could tailor this education technology tool to the youngest kids. And this is a huge challenge for technology, right? Building an application, a web application that works for a middle schooler versus a kindergartner is quite different. So we then ran a second validation study. We made a version of Roar that was half the length. We used some mathematical models to optimize its efficiency. And we had, once again, at home, a group of 6 and 7 year olds take Roar. This is showing their accuracy. So those that are less accurate down here, those that are more accurate on this side. Then we administer them this reading out loud assessment that is scored based on the complexity of words they can read out loud. You can once again see a very strong correlation between our new totally automated web application and this individually administered reading assessment. So from there, we started expanding through a research practice partnership model, as I mentioned, to making sure that it's also valid in the school setting. So where we would work in collaboration with schools, they would roll out ROAR across the whole school district, and then our team of research coordinators would come in and individually administer assessments and look at the correspondence between the ROAR measure and the individually administered assessments. We've now done these types of validation studies in over 5,000 students across districts all around the United States. This often involves my team flying out to work in collaboration with a school, and also in Latin America as well to validate the ROAR in both English and Spanish. So we then did some additional work to optimize ROAR to be efficient. I'm going to kind of skip through this because I think a lot of people probably won't be interested in the mathematical details. The idea is like through this research practice partnership model, we're always working to build a more efficient measure. So for example, we created a new computer adaptive testing algorithm that makes the ROAR measure adapt to try to more quickly zoom in on a kid's reading level. We found a consortium of schools that were interested in testing this more efficient version, and we found that we're able to make the test 40% faster and still maintain the same accuracy of the measures. This was a exciting paper that just came out actually earlier this year. And then finally, one of the things we're working on right now is making sure the measure is engaging to a broad audience of children, and then actually looking at how the game design, the design of characters and gameplay can improve the efficiency, precision, and accuracy of this screening measure. Okay, so I was talking about our first ROAR measure, single word reading, also known as ROAR word. ROAR has expanded to be a whole suite of measures looking at different aspects of reading skills. So we have measures of phonological awareness, sentence reading efficiency. I'm going to skip through talking about more validation studies and end by showing the teacher and parent-facing side of ROAR. So we have our ROAR Foundational Reading Skills and Dyslexia Screening Suite. This suite of ROAR measures has actually been approved as an official dyslexia or reading difficulty screener now across 3 states. We're used around the country. So kids take these measures. They take about 15 to 20 minutes. This is what it looks like for a kid. So they log in. We're integrated with the major single sign-on system, so kids can log in just by holding their QR code up to the webcam, logs them into the Roar dashboard. The characters guide them through the series of games that have been assigned to them. By the way, as a point around the goal of being open access and transparency, you'll see links and QR codes at the bottom of each slide. Madeline, I'm happy to share the slides afterward. These will take you to the videos and materials I'm showing. We try to keep everything totally open. So this is what a teacher or school administrator would see. This is showing the score reports where in real time, as students are completing the measure, administrators and teachers see groupings with identifying which kids need support and which skills. They can look at the data in real time, so right as students are completing the measures. And then we also provide open access materials like giving overviews of these foundational reading skills and curated recommendations for how to intervene to support students. Now, for the school district leaders, one of the big studies we're running right now, we're in collaboration with schools around the country. Florida would be a great place as well, is thinking about best practices in multilingual learners. Back to Madeline's original question, like beyond just screening for challenges in reading, there's kind of the cutting edge of science is understanding how to leverage this data to really personalize instruction to the linguistic diversity of the students that you work with. Finally, here are links to open access resources. So we have resources for educators, including details of how to run Roar. It's about a 5-minute video that will teach you how to run Roar across your whole district. We give guidance for English language learners specifically. So that's the longer answer to your questions, and then a whole guide of next steps. We then have a professional development protocol with video guides for teachers or parents that want more information. We kind of have we're starting to build an open curriculum to help support teachers and parents that want to learn more about how to intervene to support students. Then, of course, Roar at Home, which is now open for signups right now. I'll say it's not doesn't support mobile phones, requires a tablet or a laptop. You can sign up, create accounts for your kids. Our goal is to democratize access to research-backed assessments. So you could sign up, take Roar measures, participate in research studies, get score reports in real time, and we have a whole website of free open access resources for families. So I will end there. Thank you all.
How very cool. And I know there are a lot of folks who are here with some other role, but are also parents. And so we're hopefully taking some of that. I wanted to ask you a couple of things. We've had a couple of sort of groups of questions that are coming in through the chat and coming back to what we're all working on with Reading Pals. One is about like, you're talking about the intensity of intervention. Your study is measuring 160 hours. Our volunteers are working with students 30 hours a year. What are your thoughts to encourage volunteers for the role they have to play in this? And the second one would be, there are a lot of concerns about kids who have short attention spans.
Yeah.
And do you have any feedback for that or suggestions engaging?
If anyone has suggestions for adults with short attention spans, I'm all ears too. I mean, I could tell you all what we all already know about how, changes in our lifestyles have made it much more challenging not to check email and Lynn saying that to me. Yeah, I think there's probably going to be a whole stream of that's me's in here. I have no good recommendations on the short attention span part. I mean, other than, it needs to be engaging.
Yeah.
Um, I, on one level, so I work at Stanford, and it's a big place, driving, work around artificial intelligence and, new technology. I build a lot of technology. And I think that technology really does have promise to support humans. But um, kids learn best from engaging, caring, compassionate educators. And um, often the engagement question, how do you, in terms of attention, just sitting kids on a device and hoping that that's going to help them overcome their reading challenges. It sounds like that's not your guys' approach. Um, So, I think to all the volunteers here, the work you're doing, it can be transformative in kids' lives. And there are more opportunities for technology to help out. I think especially with the assessment side, like, I don't know to what extent Reading Pals does assessment work, but and you said like, you have these half-hour sessions, right? And that's often the amount of time it takes to administer an assessment. So this is our goal with Roar is that, the assessment side, just have kids take the measures at home, have their parents create an account, they can share the score reports with you. Now that's a half hour more that you get to spend working with this young kid one-on-one, like trying to inspire them to think about reading skills in a different way, as opposed to a half hour where you're like following the technical manual of some expensive measure and spending that time assessing the kid. So, uh, you know, oh, and you asked also about the dosage part. So, everything's helpful, but for kids with profound struggles, it's like anything. If getting in shape, if you're really out of shape, it's going to take a lot of work to get in shape. If your reading skills are, if you're 2 years, 3 years behind in reading, if you're an eighth grader that's reading at a second grade level, um, you're not going to make 6 years of progress over a little bit of time. Does that mean that a little bit of time isn't helpful? No, I mean it's still helpful, but it is an important point to keep in mind in terms of setting expectations and the amount of instruction that the farther a kid is behind, um, the more support they're going to need to catch up. So the ideal
Yeah,
world is that we're screening universally early on. You guys are all coming in and giving the kids the support they need right away so that they don't end up 4, 5, 6 years behind.
right. Yeah, there's a question in here too. We hear a lot in early childhood about pre-literacy skills. Are there early things we can do in fun and play that will wire the brain to make it easier?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, development is this kind of continuous process unfolding over time, right? I mean, language early on matters. Early language development predicts a lot about future reading development. So having, an environment with like a lot of language around, that doesn't mean just sitting in front of a TV and listening, but like having, engaging caregivers around you who are providing a rich environment. That's like the first step. Then when you get to this, transition to kindergarten age, starting to work on phonological awareness, starting to slowly build up knowledge of letters and letter sounds, right? Like each stage of reading, you know, takes work and it's easier in a one-on-one setting. So, starting to work on and practice these things with your kids really helps, set the foundation. And at each age, there's supplements that are going to help set kids on a advantageous developmental trajectory. And for some kids, it's going to take a lot more work than others. Some kids, learn their letter sound correspondences really quickly, and others, it's a grueling process where it really helps to have a compassionate, educated, kind, thoughtful adult working with them.
Yeah. I mean, I love you said sort of in passing, we teach reading once children know words. And I think of how often we share this message as advocates for early childhood that vocabulary is the foundation of literacy. It's not that you need to push into the younger and younger years the letters and the letter sounds. It's they've got to be able to recognize what the word is once they can sound it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So like, I mean, so written language is a version of language, right? And so you first want to be proficient in spoken language. And now written language, just learning a new way to represent spoken language. And so the more proficient, the larger your vocabulary in spoken language, the easier it is to learn to read. Well,
Yes. And we see from our chat admin now, children need a compassionate, educated, caring adult with them. That is hashtag reading pals. That's hashtag movement and all that we're up to. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. If you've got a few minutes, Dr. Yateman, there are some questions in the Q&A. I think you have
sure.
access.
Do you wanna read them off, and I'll leave this up just with some
We're
links.
out of time,
Uh,
but if you have a few minutes to stay in the background and type a couple answers or share any resources with our guests, please do. But for now, just thank you. This was your gift for analogy is really strong, and the images that you share and the messages of how important adults are and what the potential is with the right interventions is really important. So thank you so much for being with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
So thank you. Please, all of you join me in thanking Dr. Yateman for his time, for that fascinating presentation. And now for the next 15 minutes or so, we turn back to Reading Pals and our celebration. So first up, we want to share our 2025 program spotlight video. We chose to highlight the United Way of Broward County, which is our fastest growing program. With 159 active volunteers this year, serving just shy of 200 students, they've seen an increase of 46% in 3 years, and an increase of 52% in terms of students paired with mentors. So let's take a closer look at all they do.
So do you know what that sign is? Exclamation, right? What do you do with an exclamation mark?
You try to be loud.
Yeah, a little excited, right? Oh, drat, not that.
It gives a sense of community. It makes us feel that we are not alone. We are part of a big piece of puzzle that comes together to make it all one. And it gives us this confidence that we are able to do what we need to do because we have the support of the community behind us.
Out clear and strong.
ReadingPals is a statewide early literacy initiative. We work with VPK all the way up to 3rd grade. We have 171 volunteers. Currently have 21 different schools, and we have 1 Boys and Girls Club.
I've been with the program at least 10 years. 5 years I've been the coordinator. It changes lives. For many of the kids, it closes the achievement gap, and quite a few of the kids leave above grade level that have Reading Pals, and they were below. A lot of the children are like followers, and by the end of the year, they become leaders. They're confident in their reading.
When they had that dedicated adult come sit with them every week and they bond through the pages of a book, it is magical.
Over time, we get to know the volunteers. We meet them, we greet them, they care for us. They check in on us too, and we check in with them. It's relationships, and that's what makes it a dynamic environment.
Do you write in it every day? The first thing I ask them when I pick them up from the classroom is, how was your weekend? What did you do? And I also, next question is, what did you learn today? Because it's important to me not only to see what they're learning in the classroom, but to see the excitement in their face that somebody's actually interested in their life and what's going on.
Bill?
Yes! Say it again. Film! Yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah! Boom! Good job!
It's not just the reading, it helps them with their social skills, their own confidence, bringing them out of their shell in many cases.
When I first picked up my student Kelsey, she was an adorable child, but I could barely get her to talk. So the first 2 sessions, she was so shy. And then Tuesdays became like a highlight of both of our weeks. And we built that connection, and now I can't get her to stop talking. So she's really blossomed both academically and also both socially and emotionally.
They look forward to it. They ask for it. Are you going to come? Can you come another day? And it's just kind of a little buffer to make them feel important.
Over the years, we've given out thousands and thousands of books. And those thousands and thousands of books have not just built their home shelves and their home libraries, but have created long-lasting memories that it goes from the reading pal and the reading at the school to the home, in the family, for repeated readings and understanding.
They take their books to recess, they take their books home, they bring them to lunch, and it just really, that love of reading is instilled in them.
It's all about having a great time and reading. Reading is the best, but you always have to stay focused and try your best to sound out the words that you don't know yet, and then your Reader Pals will help you.
We have monthly meetings where we get to share things that are working or not working. So there's a lot of support.
This is our first year having that volunteer council where the volunteers can kind of come and share best practices and talk about different things.
It's always good to have a say. And in any type of council, when you're able to have an open forum and an open chair where the room is all ears. I think it's very valuable.
We have them being eager, we have our support with United Way, and then we obviously have the children's movement sort of just giving us guidance and resources too.
It's not just the children that benefit. You know, it's rewarding for the Reading Pals to be able to watch them improve and see them grow and change.
It's given me a new perspective on life. I see the world through her eyes, and she's very imaginative and sometimes nonsensical in the way that kids are, and that's, I think, good for adults to not lose sight of that or to be reminded of it.
When I grow up, I want to be a reading pal and an astronaut and a firefighter and a doctor and a talent show and a talent show person and an ice cream person.
And an ice cream person.
That is pretty sweet. May we all have such big dreams and mentor to make a difference, as we say. Congratulations again to CJ Yancey, the coordinator in Broward County, and I see Amelia here as well, and Kathleen Cannon, the fearless leader there at the United Way. So happy to recognize you this year. Next up, we recognize our standout coordinator for the 2024-2025 school year. This is someone who has orbited Reading Pals since the beginning. She was working as a school-based coach at Purcell Elementary 13 years ago when she got to see volunteers going into the classroom that very first year. She got to see how motivated the children were from that experience. And then after retiring from the school district years later, Ruthie Teets is now completing her very first year as Reading Pals coordinator in Polk County, the heart of Reading Pals where this all got started. So please join me in congratulating our standout coordinator of the year, Ruthie. Thank you for your dedication to your local community, for your commitment to this program, and for answering the call to join us in Tallahassee. What fun we had in Children's Week at Children's Day at the Capitol this year. Let me turn the floor to you for 2 minutes to share what this all means to you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited. Really, thank you so much to the Children's Movement and to this great state of Florida. This is awesome. It's truly an honor. I'd like to thank our CEO and President of the United Way of Central Florida, Christina Kreiser, COO Rod Crowley, Gretchen Saranik, our supervisor of the Success by Six, and my supervisor, Amber Qureshi, because they're always so dedicated in their unwavering support of Reading Pals at the United Way in Central Florida. This is awesome. So I just want to say that I am truly blessed. Any of you that are my Reading Pals in Polk County, thank you, thank you. You guys do such an awesome job, and I'm very, very fortunate to have over 200 dedicated Reading Pals volunteers, and they show up weekly, and they are full of enthusiasm, and the children just love all of you. As you know, the program was started homegrown. Carol Jenkins Barnett and her husband Barney started it 13 years ago, and they were residents in the Polk County area where I am in Lakeland. And I feel very, very honored to be part of this program. It's an amazing program overall, and it means so much to me. As you mentioned, I was fortunate enough to see it from grassroots when it very, very first was in the beginning infancy stages in year one. And here I am 13 years later, getting to be truly a part of it as the Reading Pals program manager. So it's pretty awesome to be part of this program. The children absolutely love it. I mean, the minute they walk in the door, their eyes just beam and they're smiling, and there's lots of hugs, and it's just, you can tell that they truly wait and look forward to having their Reading Pal come. And it's kind of one of those win-win situations, because not only do the Reading Pals, the students themselves, get a chance to have that one-on-one, very individualized attention, but the Reading Pal volunteers get just as much out of it. They just love it. And so we want to just keep up the good work here in the state of Florida, and keep working with our little guys, and they, they're growing not just academically, but as you mentioned, they're also growing and social emotionally and becoming wonderful human beings and going to be the leaders down the road. So again, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to, from our wonderful discussion today, go brain engineers and Reading Pals roar.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you.
Well, Ruthie, take a minute. While you were talking, there were about 600 people thanking you in the chat because you did so much outreach to get the Central Florida contingent here today. So take a look through that, love, and congratulations on
Thanks again.
Coordinator of the Year. And so thank you, Ruthie, and thank you to all our Reading Pals coordinators who make all of this possible, all of this magic possible throughout the state. And with that, we are out of time. Remember, if you were looking for a certificate of participation for your participation today, you can email us at info@childrensmovementflorida.org, and you'll find that again in the chat. We'll get that to you quickly. We hope many of you will return as volunteers next year, and if you're not volunteers yet, that you will become Reading Pals. So check the chat also for that link. And in the meantime, we invite you to join us on Zoom every other week. We have something called the Future Call, where unlike today's conference, it is a Zoom meeting. So you get to see each other's faces and share ideas directly. And this is a gathering all about progress and possibility for early learning across our state, hosted by my colleague Rocio Velasquez, our Vice President of Statewide Engagement. And of course, we hope you'll follow us on social media and keep the conversation going there. Lastly, we want to highlight if anyone needs an excuse to come to Miami in the summer and loves this kind of talk about the brain and how to work, and in particular with children who may be struggling with dyslexia or things like that, there's an Unlocking Literacy conference hosted by the Lucy Project on July 29th, and there'll be a link for that in the chat as well. They've got 2 tracks this year. One is 0 to 5, and that one is accessible for parents or grandparents or teachers in the classroom, anybody who wants to work with that age group. And then they've got more of a school track that is for educators. And so check that out if this is up your alley. And thank you so much for being with us. Have a great day.